Goedenavond iedereen, good evening everybody. Welcome to our viewers this evening and welcome to our guests, Oshra Schwartz from Israel and Shira Toren from upstate New York. We are happy to have you here today on a very special day. 4th of May is in the Netherlands, the day of remembrance of the Holocaust and all the victims of the Second World War. And tomorrow is our Liberation Day, celebrating 75 years of liberation. And the film we have chosen to show you and to discuss, and the person we have chosen to show you and discuss, talk about both the Holocaust and especially what happened after the Holocaust and what happened directly after the liberation and what happened to people years after that. I am very happy to have you with us, Oshra and Shira. You're mostly welcome, and I'm very happy to have you all public who probably have already watched the film before we are talking now. And thanks, Oshra, for making that film. My name is Hannah Luden. I'm the director of CIDI. CIDI, the Center for Information and Documentation Israel, is the Dutch watchdog for anti-Semitism, among other things. We're also the public affairs organizations regarding Israel's, not politics, but Israel's existence and situation in the world, but this is not the topic of today. And one of the things we do a lot of work on is education. And I think the film we saw, and I hope the discussion we're going to have now, will help us discuss the question about what was the war, what is the meaning of the war 75 years later, and of the liberation, and what we can all learn from that for the time now. Oshra Schwartz is one of the co-makers of this film. Amalia is not with us anymore, unfortunately, and I have asked her to start with a short introduction about the film and about whatever she thinks is appropriate in that context. And Shira is the daughter of the main protagonist of the film, the daughter of Lena Küchler. But Shira is also my childhood friend. We've known each other before we realized Shira's mother is such an important person. For us, she was just Shira's mother for a very long time. And I think after having watched the film, and of course we knew about that long before that, there is another dimension to Lena and maybe to history and maybe to many people who live in Israel and in other countries, survivors of the Holocaust, who have built their lives and helped building a better world. Oshra, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon from Tel Aviv. Around the start of the millennium, Amalia, my good friend Amalia Margolin, and I decided to make a film about children survivors of the Holocaust because we felt that it was already the time to talk to these people before we lose them, before they start disappearing. And we felt it was urgent to start talking to the children. So the first story that came up was, of course, My 100 Children. The book was a bestseller, a huge bestseller in Israel. In my generation, everybody read the book. I think I read it a few times, Amalia, my friend also. And so we decided to try and find the children. Where are the 100 children? And we remember that at the end of the book, Lena brought the children to a kibbutz, to Kvutzat Schiller in Israel. So we called the kibbutz immediately. And the secretary said, yes, we still have 4 of Lena's children in the kibbutz, they're still members. And the next Saturday, we just went there. And it was the beginning of an amazing journey that took around 4 years, from the beginning of the research till the finish line of the film. But one of the first things that we needed to do was to ask Shira's permission. So one of the children had Shira's number and she was in close contact with her, and she said, okay, we'll contact Shira and ask. Shira lives in New York and we have to ask her if she wants us to make the film. Shira came to Israel a few months later and we met, and Shira said, yes, of course, I want you to make the film, but I have one condition. I want to join the journey. I want to be there with you. Because when I was a child, Shira should tell it from her point of view. But Shira said that it was for her, it was an opportunity to dive in the story because when she was a child, she was, I don't want to say reluctant, you would say it in your own words. But naturally, as a child, she didn't dive into the story from a grown-up point of view. So we were a little bit anxious about it. Filmmakers really don't want the intervention of a family member. We didn't want her to censor our point of view, to censor the story. And we were a little bit anxious, but we didn't have any other choice. So we went on with it. And luckily, I gained a sister. And now it's a very, very good friendship for me. And we also travel a little bit with the film. We've been with the film together in France, in the United States, in Israel, in quite a few gatherings and showings of the film. And later on, I'll tell you some stories from behind the scenes. Shira.
Good morning, everyone. It's morning in New York, and thank you, Hannah, thank you, Oshra, and thank you everyone who's watching this Zoom session. So I'm what's called the biological daughter of Lena Küchler, and by other people call me the 101. And my mother, Lena, was very well known in Israel because of her books. As Oshra mentioned, everyone read the books, and also she gave lectures because she was a psychologist, a child psychologist, and combined her experience from the Holocaust and saving the children in her professional practice. She really was an authority about children. And I always said when Lena Küchler talked, people listened. So I grew up with this kind of environment. I always said my mother was very well known, and she received many awards in Israel, and she was met by the president of the time, and she was Mother of the Year. But for me, she was just a mother. And I was born when my mother, I was born after my mother brought the children to Israel. Then she met my father, and I was born later. And by then, my mother was 47 when she had me, and my father was 55. So I was basically, for me, I was a child of elderly parents with a big history behind them. So unfortunately, my mother passed away many years ago, and it's basically Oshra and I are continuing to carry the story. And also many of the children, my brothers and sister, have passed away as well. There's only a handful left. So here we are, and we're trying to remind everyone of what happened and the heroism that took place at that time. Hannah. You
myself. Oshra, I was wondering, you said because the book was so famous, you thought it was a good idea to start with this story. And you said you met about 4 of Lena's children. On the first...
We started with the 4 in the kibbutz, but
and you've met more. Just a minute. But I wanted to... What was the first thing they told you when you came to them and you told them about your idea of making this journey to Poland in order to try to find some of the things that happened there? What was their reaction?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, the first woman that we met was lerares, and she was a member of the kibbutz. And I remembered it as if it was yesterday. We sat in her very small, tiny living room in a kibbutz apartment. and her husband was sitting behind us. And the first sentences that Leah said, she said, "I never told a story. I never told my story to anyone, not even to my children or my husband who is sitting here. And I'm going to break this silence, silence that of all of my life, just for Lena. I really don't want to open the wounds, but I feel an obligation to the memory of Lena." And she said it in our first meeting, but it happened over and over again. Most of the children never spoke about the stories. Not since Lena asked them the first time. One of the very important things with Lena's story is that she had a psychological background, a professional psychological background from before the war. And when she collected the children, she gathered the children, she knew that she had to speak to them and to interview them and to encourage them to tell the story, to talk about their trauma. And I think this is one of the key reasons, or how would I say it? I think this is what made all this rehabilitation possible. Because when they arrived to Israel as small children or young adults, like at the age of teenagers or young adults, when they came to Israel, most of them around 1984,
48.
Nobody wanted to hear these stories. And they didn't want to talk about it because, they had this myth of Sabra. They wanted to be Israelis. They didn't want to carry this burden of horrible stories of the diaspora and the Holocaust. And the Israelis didn't want to hear about the Holocaust. They wanted to hear about the heroism of the war, about the underground. They didn't want to hear about, there was even some kind, if I may say so, contempt to all these victims. They called them, they said that they went like sheep to the slaughter. And all the heroic Sabra myth couldn't accept the complexity of this trauma. And I think one of the reasons was actually because Israel couldn't help. People here in Palestine, actually, it was before the state, couldn't help their brothers and sisters and parents and uncles and aunts who were slaughtered in Europe. So it was a very complex trauma that everybody wanted to push away and to block. So the children didn't speak about it because nobody wanted to hear. And luckily, Lena wrote their testimonies, so they did have an opportunity to open it up. Years later, we came, and they were already in their 60s or 70s, and some of them even in their 80s. And they had, this was the second time they opened. Some of them did speak about the Holocaust. Not all of them were silent, but most of them were silent. So it was really emotional to hear these stories for the first time. And one of the things that we realized from the very first interview of Leah Reved in the kibbutz, that we are a little bit crazy. What were we thinking about? We were not psychologists, we are filmmakers, we don't have any experience or knowledge whatsoever about talking to people about their trauma. So what were we doing there? We went out of Leah's house. First of all, I should say that at the end of the interview, after she told us all this amazing, traumatic, painful story, we went out of her house and we felt two things. One, that we needed to tell the story. There's no way back now. And the other thing was that it's going to be so difficult. My children were still young there then. It was 1999. And I had small children. I came back home and I held my children and I said, how am I going to survive it? hearing over and over and over the story of children being deserted to their destiny by their parents and feeling being and having this horrible experience of being deserted from a child's point of view. How would they survive it? How would we survive it? And actually we did, but it was very, very complicated.
And yet the film talks very little about the experience of the Holocaust itself. It is mainly about what happened after the war. Why did you make this choice?
First of all, the story of Lena's house begins after the war. Lena came back from the east, where she stayed in a village east to Krakau, where she hid for the last years of the war. I mean, her story is very complicated, but
pretending to be, excuse me, pretending to be non-Jewish, of course.
Yes, yeah,
yes.
Right. She worked as a nanny for a family where like rural gentry, rural Polish gentry. And she came back from the war, and first she tried to rehabilitate her life. She found her brother there, was a soldier in the Polish army, and he helped her to find an apartment and to start rehabilitating her life. And for a while, she even thought to go back to the university and finish her PhD in psychology. But one day, as she wrote in the book, her feet just carried her to this place in the 38 Dluga Street in Krakow, where the survivors were gathered. It was the Jewish Committee House. And she went up to the second floor and she found the children. And I think it didn't take a long time for her to decide to take responsibility for these children's life. And so this story starts after the war, the story of Lena, of this heroic, amazing story about the children's house, the orphanage that she established, and where she actually saved these children, saved their, maybe not their physical life, but of course their emotional life. The personal stories of some of the children are still in the film, as you must have realized, because the children did tell some stories about themselves. And we made this journey with 5 of the children to Poland, and 2 more joined us in France. And we had some interviews in Israel as well. So I think total, we have 10 children who told us their stories in the film. We have 10 children in the film. But we interviewed altogether more than 50. We met and interviewed more than 50, most of them in Israel, but in France as well, in the United States, in other places. And until this day, when I traveled with the film, actually, mainly in the Memorial Day of the Holocaust in Israel, I'm always invited to lectures and to show the film in different places. And in every lecture, someone says, I knew someone who was in Lena's house. And some of the times I still found about people that I didn't meet, that I'd never heard of. So the story is still somehow alive. It's still going on.
Shira, what was it for you to go to meet your elder brother and sister, and especially to go with them to Poland? What was it? How was it for you?
Well, over the years, when I grew up, there were some children that we were in close touch with, who would come and visit us very often and come and go from our house. And Hannah, maybe you even remember that, because we were such good friends as small children. So they would always come and go. And there were some that would occasionally come, and there's some that I didn't even know, which couple of them were in the movie. So it was kind of a mixture of people who were closest to us for their own reasons. Some of the folks just couldn't deal with the past, and maybe Lena symbolized the past and the trauma they had, and some of them really felt that she was their mother forever. So when I grew up, I wanted like a normal life, like any other child in Israel. And I really kind of removed myself from the story and from the fact that I had such a famous mother. And I remember many incidents that people will ask me, "You are the child of Lena Küchler?" And I would be like, yeah, but I felt it was that I really wanted to stand for my own. Of course, now that I'm a grown up, I see it differently, and I appreciate what she did even more, and I feel very connected. And this is why I wanted to go with Oshra and the brothers and sisters to Poland, which was an experience I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And also the contact that we made in the journey made such a strong connection. And another thing that kind of happened during the filming is that, and I don't think Oshra anticipated it, that the children really wanted to tell me their stories. And maybe, you know, I resemble my mother a little bit. I look a little bit like her. There was some sort of transference here that maybe they felt that I am my mother to a certain degree, especially in the setting of being in Poland. Maybe it was cold. It was this time of the year, like March, April, when we went filming there, and it felt very real. So for me, it was like an amazing experience to be there, to be in the shoes of my mother. And these are very big shoes to fill, and connect with my brothers and sisters that some of them I didn't know so well.
So it was the connection, because there is a scene in the film which I felt uneasy about, and that's the scene where you're dancing in a cafe, and I was like, "What's happening here? What is the relationship between who and who?" It was very. I felt awkward. Let's put it this way.
It was a little awkward, but you know, there were so many heavy moments in this filming. And I don't remember exactly what we did that morning, but there were a few scenes that were so, okay, so it was so difficult. So when we came to that cafe and there was music and dancing, it was just like a little release, and it was a connection. And I think neither one of us knew exactly what's going on. Oshra, what did we do that morning? Was that the morning we filmed in that village that they said that people were buried under the road?
No, that morning it's Zakopane. So in Zakopane, that morning we made a journey with Yossi to search for his identity. And one of the things, we of course, everything was prearranged. First of all, we made a research journey the year before. So we knew all the places that we were going to book, where we were going to stay. We knew the cafe. We knew that they are going to be dancing. Everything was prearranged, of course, and scripted, because when you do a documentary, you still have to have a script. You have to have a very, very good plan. Otherwise, you just waste the time. So we knew that we are going to have very difficult questions about Yossi's identity, whether he's Jewish or not. And we knew that we will never have any answer for him. Putting him in this very, they're not even Polish, these people in Zakopane. They are people, they are called gurals. They look different, and Yossi looks so much like them. He really looks like one of them. And we knew this is, of course, very manipulative, but this is what you do as a filmmaker. You manipulate the situation. So we wanted to put everybody there and to leave this paradox of a person who doesn't really know who he is, whether he's Jewish or not, whether he lived in a false identity all of his life and is going to remain in this false identity. And so we knew that only the images will tell the story, and the images of him dancing and Shira dancing, and these people, these local people with the folkloristic dancing and clothing and the environment that is very, very local. We knew that it's going to be very intense, and it was.
It's interesting that you say that about Yossi, because to me he looks so Israeli. It's very interesting what you say. But what I found very touching. Touching is maybe too light a word for what I mean. Is his story about, he says, people say that I was found under the dead body of my mother, but then I don't know if it's a real story or not. It's a person who with no past, in the sense that he knows nothing at all about his past, and he's desperately hoping to get some information, and there is nothing there for him. And I think he's not the only one. I think there are many people in this world who know nothing about their past.
I have to say something about Yossi. I mean, Yossi's tragedy has never been resolved. At the first day that we came to the kibbutz, Yossi is one of the 4 members of the kibbutz. Each one of them gave us a mission. Leah wanted us to find her long lost sister, who was lost in the Holocaust, was adopted by the concierge of the building where she grew up. And Yossi wanted us to find someone who grew up in the orphanage with him like a sibling, but they lost touch from tragic reasons. And,
excuse me, and this is where it says in the photo, this is us. He shows a photo with two young children.
Right. So, and that was Yossi, and the other Menachem who wanted to find his adopting sisters during the war, the Polish family that adopted him, and each one gave us a mission. And at the beginning, we thought that we are going to fulfill the mission. We felt we had so much energy to go on and to find all these long lost people, and we didn't manage to find any of them. We tried our best. We went to all these TV shows in Poland when you found your long lost brother or sister, and we tried everything, and nothing worked. So Yossi and all of them remained without a happy ending, actually. And Yossi used to come incognito to sit in the screenings of the film in the Tel Aviv Cinematheque. The film was screened for a few months in commercial screenings in Tel Aviv Cinematheque. And he used to come from the kibbutz and sit in the hall in the dark and wait until the light is up and people start recognizing him, as if he found his identity. Somehow, people hugged him and said, wow, it's so good to see you. Your story is so emotional. We felt such an identification with you. And for him, it was like for moments, he knew who he was. And he went again and again to sit in the screenings. It's very interesting.
I want to add in this note of finding people, which is a little bit different, that I remember as a child, my mother kept those albums of pictures of the children, which we still have. And people will come would call her, make an appointment and come to our house just to look in those albums over and over again to find their lost relatives, their lost children. Even those like 10, 20 years had passed since the war, they would still come and look at those albums because there were so many unresolved issues and so many people still had a hope in their heart that one day they can find their children or their parents or their brothers and sister. And somehow they connected Lena with this, maybe she crossed paths with these people. And I think maybe most of the time, if not all, it was not resolved. There were no answers.
I remember that we were children, we are three of us of the same age, more or less. And probably, and you're second generation, I'm not second generation. So my parents came to Israel before the war. They, as Lena said, they are survivors, but they are not remains. They survived the war without being there. But I remember as a child, it was so touching. Every day at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there was this show, the office for looking for relatives. Remember the radio show? המדור לחיפוש קרובים.
Yeah.
Yes.
מבין עברית.
Yeah. It was in other countries too.
Stories. It was like, for me, it was hypnotic. It's like, it was a film all over again. I heard all these stories. I'm looking for my brother. We lived in this town, and the people used to say what they've been through during the war and how they left, how they lost this brother or sister or parent or cousin. And it went on, I think, in the 90s as well. People
Yes.
kept on looking for the relatives in the 90s.
Yes, it was all over the world, not only in Israel. And even, we know stories about people who found their relatives many years after, many years later. I want to go back to the film.
Oh, sorry.
I want to go back to the film. And do you want to add anything, Oshra?
I wanted to say something about identity, just try to make it short. I think the question of identity is one of the most main questions in the film. Not only Yossi's identity, but the Jewish identity. Most of the children had a mixed identity, being saved by Polish people, Christians. Some of them actually never knew who they were, if they were Jewish or if they were Christians, if they were Polish or they were Israeli. They were all living in between all these identities, and it was never resolved. There's this story of Lilian, who just recently died, unfortunately. And she told us when we interviewed her, she didn't say it in the film, but she didn't say it on camera, but off camera, she said, I'm still not here and not there. I'm still in between. Sometimes I'm still this child who goes from church to church in the horrible winter of Warsaw, hiding in the church and feeling that this is the safe place for me because she survived in the streets of Warsaw as a child and hating Jews. I grew up hating Jews. I grew up anti-Semitic, and it's still in me.
Yes, and you met these people more than 50 years after the story, 55 even. You said in 1999, that's when you made this film. It only was released in 2003, right?
No, it took us 4 years.
Yes.
I mean, the research was very, very long, and raising the funds, and it's a long journey. It took us 4 years.
But then you met these people. They were older then and adults and had a whole life behind them, not related to the war in Israel, most of them. What was your impression about their view of life and their view of what it meant to be a child then, to be liberated, and their lives after that? Were there any things you said, oh, this is...
I'm in awe to all these children survivors. I think this is what I call heroism. I think they are the greatest heroes existing. I mean, having been through what they had to go through, all these, I mean, for us as young mothers, when we made the film, and we know you try to protect your child from anything, if the kindergarten teachers talk up, not in a very soft manner to your child, and you say, oh, it's traumatic, it's traumatic. You start having a battle for, but these children were, I mean, and they not only survived, which you may say that survival is an instinct, but sometimes when the conditions are so horrible, you have to choose life. And they chose life. And this is heroism to me. The conditions were so unbearable. And it was such an heroic fight for life, for the children. And there were 3-year-olds that worked as, how would I say, they worked in a farm with geese in the age of 3. And the farmer used to beat them up. And they still survived it. And they stayed there and they tried to be nice to the farmer in order to get some food. I mean, all these stories were so huge. And then they came and they lived their anonymous life in Israel. Just normal, anonymous life, raising children, trying to be normal. Not all of them are normal, of course. They're carrying all this trauma with them, but still, they are our parents. This is the generation of our parents, and they actually shaped my country, shaped my homeland. So this is, in my opinion, it's a huge miracle. It's inconceivable how this could take place.
Do you have any chance to talk to their children or maybe grandchildren about this? Of course, but about this specific, story or the specific history of them, and whether it had any influence on their children?
Look, some of the children became my family. Some of the connections became very, very deep. And when Max died, I lost a relative. And when Edith died, I lost a relative. I mean, for me, some of the children were my friends, like Ariel, Nathan's son. And of course, they confided in me. They confided during the research. You go into a home.
So what are their stories? What is something you would say this is special about this line of Israelis? Or line of survivors?
Oh, it's so complicated. It's so complicated. Some of the children would tell you that I'm going to the extreme. Some of these survivors were abusing parents. They abused their children because they didn't know anything else. And just lately, there was a film that came out about, it's called The Children of Darkness. Children of survivors that go through horrible abuse, emotional and physical. But this is the extreme end. The others were smuggled with love in such a way that they just couldn't breathe anymore. And this is also, but others would tell you that they were amazing parents. I mean, it's going from extreme to extreme. It's you should tell. You are both second generation. I think you should be the ones to tell the story of the children, because for me, I was a witness. I never experienced it myself.
I think it's very individual. I grew up as one of the smothered one with so much love, and I was really precious as being a biological daughter. And the fact that Lena was able to conceive and carry a pregnancy and have a real child, I mean, not a real, but have a biological child at the age of 47, that really stayed with me for all my childhood. as I say, I never left home without a sweater. She was always so concerned about me. I think the fact that you think that there were 100 children there, and there are probably a lot more, just a round number, and then each child was married and had a couple of children. So I think there's like thousands of people that exist today between the children of the children and the grandchildren of the children, and probably another generation. So if you would make like a tree of life, you would see the work that she did that spread and touched so many young people. And I occasionally get an email or a telephone from someone that says, my parents or my grandfather had spent time at your mother's home, or people that even just cross paths, because there were a lot of children that didn't stay with Lena all the time, but they came and they stayed for a short time and they went on, and they always took pride of the fact that their path crossed with Lena and the children. And it's on and on. It's like I get messages on Facebook, Oshra get messages of people that identify their ancestors with Lena and her project.
Yes. Well, I think as a bit of an outsider, when I was watching it, I was thinking she was way ahead of her time, letting the children talk about their traumas, about their experiences, writing it down for them whenever they would want to look at it, but also give them space. The whole story about this home where they actually had they managed their own relationships. They said we had our own court, I think they called it, where we decided what to do when there was a problem among the children. I was very impressed by that, because I think this is very, it's not obvious, and it shows a very modern way of thinking and looking at children, at society as such. And I know Lena was a psychologist in Israel, and she started a whole center of child psychology, which was again quite pioneering in this time in Israel, maybe all over the world in that time. But also the way she managed this house. I would like to know more about that.
I want to say something from my personal experience. My daughter, when you grow up in Israel, you have to go to the army. And my younger daughter chose to serve as commander, actually, but it's not really the regular work of a commander, in a special base where they take children, teenagers, or some of them are homeless, who come from the worst neighborhoods, and they also have police records. And like 25 years ago, the army decided to make a special unit for them, and they developed a rehabilitation system, how to work with them and how to bring them to bring them back to society, actually, because they were antisocial already. And my daughter worked with them, and when she saw my work in my 100 Children, she knew the film and everything, she said, "Mommy, why won't you show the film to the commanders, to us? Because all the commanders are girls. All the people who work with these very violent, with a criminal background teenagers are girls, because they're afraid of male authority, so they bring them only female authority, which is much more soft and delicate." And she said, "Why won't you show us the film? Because I think we can learn a lot from Lena." Because Lena had to take these antisocial kids who were in the partisans, like Nathan, and she somehow managed to re-socialize them, to bring them back to society. And we want to learn from Lena. So I brought the film and I showed it in the base, not to the soldiers, I showed it to the commanders who were like 19, 80 years old. And Yeah, no, they were after a course, they were already deep in their service. And they said that it was for them, they learned so much from Lena. And I think Nahum Bogner is the one who quotes Lena in the film and says that Lena told him that she learned everything from her rabbi grandfather, who said that with tough kids, you have to go on soft. You have to be soft with tough kids. You have to be gentle. And she said that this film was for her, was a guide for all these young commanders, was a guide to their work. So I think Lena is potential, is from the film. The film is a potentially school for education, for rehabilitation, for women leadership. There are so many interesting subjects that you can learn from Lena's stories. It's not only a Holocaust story, it's much, much more, and it's still so relevant.
Coming back to Nathan, the bully, Shira, maybe you want to tell more about Nathan, because he's sort of a mysterious figure in the film, I think, in a way.
So obviously in the film, and in his youth, Nathan was very difficult person, and he was aggressive and he was violent. And Lena really loved him a lot, and he loved Lena all her life. And that was like, he was like a real son to her, him and his wife and their children. And he took care of her. He would come and visit. They lived quite far, and neither one had a car, and they would use like public transportation of travel back and forth. And he would do anything she wants. He was so loyal to her beyond understanding. And when it came to make the film and talk about her, he didn't want to do it. But then we talked to him, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to do it for her." Right, Oshra?
Could you tell us a bit about his story then, and maybe then in Israel? What happened to him as an adult person? What happened? What was his story in the war and then in Israel?
Well, Nathan came to Israel in Exodus, and he settled in Haifa. And I guess at that time there was a bunch of young men who came with him. Apparently they lived in caves at the beginning. They lived in caves on Mount Carmel because there was nothing. And he wasn't accepted.
Excuse me, and that was in the year 46, 47, right? Before the establishment of the State of Israel. 47. I think so.
Right?
Yes.
Oshra?
They didn't arrive with Exodus, because Exodus was brought back to Germany. Right. But they came with as illegal immigrants before the establishing of the country.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he got a job working for the port authorities in Haifa, and he worked there. And he was handicapped. He had only one eye, and he was missing fingers, and he wasn't a healthy person. But
he married.
He had children. It wasn't easy. It was never easy with him. I mean, if you ask his own children, they say it wasn't easy. But the most important, and he was like a real brother to me all my life, and his children were, I consider, being their aunt or their sister. We never know what to call it. He had a normal life. Yeah. She fixed him. Yeah.
Well, I think we have to close this session, but maybe there is something you want to add before we thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you wanted to add, Oshra? Is there a film coming about the rest of the material you collected?
I have a cat here, but so excuse me. This is
Ah, this is funny.
I'll talk about the 100 children. I feel that there's still audience for the film, even though we finished in 2003. There is still audience for the film, and each time we show it to a new generation, young teenagers really love the film and identify with it. And somehow Lena's stories brings with it, I think the book as well brings with it some kind of optimism and love of life that and believe in humanity, in the humanity in each one of the children, that everybody can relate to it somehow. This Lena's story brings something that is very valuable, in my opinion. And with I regret that we can't converse with our audience now. It feels a little bit weird for me, because what I do since 2003, I schlep myself and I travel all over the place, sometimes with public transport, because I feel that the conversations with the audience are very valuable. They let people talk about it and react to it. And it's, for me, it's very important. I feel that this is one of the main, how would I say, values, or I don't know how to say it, but I feel that it makes the story alive and still interacts with new audiences each year, each decade. And that's all. This is my conclusion.
Shira?
I'm very, very grateful for Oshra and Amalia Morgolin to make this film. And I think it's so important because every year we lose a few of the children, and there's very few left now. Most of my brothers and sisters who went through this journey are no longer with us. And I think, you know, in about 10 years, probably there'll be no Holocaust survivors, or maybe 15 or 20. And all we're gonna have left with is their stories, some films, and among that, this important piece of evidence and the way Oshra and Amalia had documented the experience. And I think it's so important that we'll remember it and learn from it. And as Oshra said, it's a film of hope, and it's a film of moving on.
Yes.
Rebuilding
your life.
Yeah, move on with your life, even though you went through such a horror trauma. So I thank you, Oshra, for making the film, and I thank you, Hannah, to bring us together in this Zoom and showing the film in Holland. And
I thank you both very much for being with us, for telling us more about it. And I do hope that people will show this film further to others, because I think indeed that what this film shows you, it gives you some, I wouldn't say understanding, but some feeling about the time that was, but also about what happens after these horrors are behind us, but people carry them with them inside ourselves. We all carry our traumas, and these scars are something we should respect and take care of for us all as a society. This is indeed, to me, the most important message of this story. Hope, courage, and realizing that there is also always something we could do to make the world a bit better, a bit nicer. So thank you very much. And in a bit more than 2 hours, there is a special siren here in the Netherlands to commemorate the Holocaust and other victims. And then tomorrow we are going to celebrate liberation, and I hope we all remember that liberation doesn't come for free, and we need to work for it every day, every moment of our lives. Thank you everyone for attending this meeting, and thank you Oshra and Shira again for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.